After Suge Knight went back to prison in 1996 for a probation violation stemming from the assault of Orlando Anderson in Las Vegas on the night of Tupac's fatal shooting, Suge's company, Death Row Records, started to crumble. And this collapse would turn deadly, as infighting broke out between different Piru gang sets associated with the company. And the first to fall was one of the closest Pirus to Suge Knight, Heron Palmer, at this intersection in Compton. Heron had a Death Row Records tattoo on his forearm and was one of the chosen few Pirus shouted out by Tupac in his hit To Live and Die in LA.
I got neck bone, Heron, punch you too.
But just 9 months after Tupac's murder, Heron would be shot 13 times in a hail of gunfire while waiting at a Compton stoplight. It was a level of violence usually only seen in movies, but this was Compton in the 1990s. And even though Heron's murder has its own Wikipedia entry, here for the first time, I will reveal the case files for this incredibly violent murder. But I think the biggest takeaway from Heron's case, in the context of the investigations into the murders of Tupac and Biggie, is how difficult it is to catch the perpetrators of drive-by shootings even when you find the getaway vehicle and its driver, which is exactly what happened with this case. On June 1st, 1997, Heron attended a picnic at Compton's Gonzales Park, which was supposedly hosted by Death Row Records and some of the Pirus associated with the label. According to his brother who was with him, Heron arrived with a friend that his brother referred to as Nado. Heron received a page and then left, returned to the park, and then left again. And that was the last time his brother would ever see him alive. Heron was officially employed by Death Row Records, where he was earning about $1,650 per month after taxes, about $3,400 in today's money. But witnesses described him as Suge's bodyguard or Suge's henchman and claimed that he did the dirty work for Suge. And Heron was allegedly involved in the drug game. His criminal record may be the most extensive of anyone I've seen in the Tupac and Biggie case files, beginning with an arrest for robbery in 1980 when he was 18 years old that wasn't prosecuted. But in the next 3 years alone, he added an arrest for drug possession that was dismissed, a conviction for carrying a loaded firearm in public, an arrest for carrying a concealed weapon, and assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer or firefighter, which landed him in jail for 6 months. There was a counterfeiting charge that was dismissed, and drug possession, 2 burglary convictions that got him another 45 days in jail, petty theft, a battery conviction that got him 30 days, and multiple robbery and burglary arrests that handed him a pair of 2-year sentences. An arrest for grand theft in 1986 violated his parole, and he wrapped up the 80s with a pair of robbery convictions that got him another 4 years behind bars. He got out in 1990 and apparently got into the drug game, with charges the following year for cocaine possession with intent to sell and for harming a police dog, which sent him back to prison for 3 more years. His release from prison in 1994 seems to have timed perfectly with the Pirus from Suge Knight's neighborhood joining Suge at Death Row Records, where Heron became a part of Suge's inner circle. And based on people I've talked to who knew Heron back then, it seems like he was well liked. And 2 years later, Heron was in Las Vegas the night Tupac was fatally shot. And just 2 weeks before Heron's own murder, a female friend of his met with 2 detectives working the Biggie homicide case and claimed that Heron had told her Tupac was killed by the Southside Crips and that the guy they beat up that night had retaliated. That, of course, would be Orlando Anderson. On the day of his own murder, when Heron left his brother at the park, he seemed to be heading in the direction of his home turf near Looters Park, 2.5 miles away. He almost made it. At approximately 6:18 p.m., Heron stopped for a light in his black 1997 Toyota 4Runner at the intersection of Rosecrans Avenue and Santa Fe, less than a mile from his neighborhood. But stopped behind him, occupants of a blue 1992 Dodge Caravan apparently recognized the death row insider sitting in front of them. Two men climbed out of the minivan and ran up to Heron's vehicle on foot and started shooting. One gunman fired with a chrome 9mm handgun through the passenger side window of his 4Runner, while the other one fired a blue steel .45 caliber handgun from behind through the SUV's rear window. A report notes there were 5 bullet holes in the backrest of Heron's seat. According to his autopsy report, Heron suffered 13 bullet wounds, including through-and-through gunshots. Of those, at least 5 were considered life-threatening on their own, with wounds to both lungs, the heart, liver, mandible, larynx, both arms, upper thighs, and more. Whoever did this wanted to make sure Heron was dead. And the shooting was brazen, not just because it was carried out at a busy intersection in broad daylight with dozens of potential witnesses, but also because parked at the curb right behind them, with a full view of everything, was a fire engine crew from a Compton Fire Department station that was just a few blocks away.
When they did that, there was a fire truck in the vicinity, so they didn't care. Well, the fire truck is not police officer, but then you got professional witness close by. That's not going to turn their head from anything.
When the shooting happened, one of the firefighters was walking back to their truck from a Mexican food spot across the street. That fire crew then transported Heron to St. Francis Medical Center in Linwood, where he was pronounced dead at 6:42 p.m. He was 34 years old. Heron died wearing his death row chain. But the firefighters weren't the only notable witnesses to the murder. The shooting had also been witnessed by Piru associates of Heron's in another vehicle who happened to be sitting across the intersection heading in the opposite direction. And they were actually heading to the same barbecue that Heron had just left. And after the shooting happened, they even chased after the gunman's minivan, but lost it. Another one of Heron's friends from that vehicle claims that they ran over to Heron and that his eyes were open and he was still breathing, but it was shallow. And in an odd detail, one of the firefighters who witnessed the shooting claimed that he saw a woman filming with a video camera from the northwest corner of the intersection, across the street from the shooting. So it's wild to think there may be video of at least the aftermath of the shooting out there somewhere. Compton Police Lieutenant Reggie Wright Sr. responded to the scene of the crime, and he recently told me what he saw.
I think they were taking Heron away because they didn't leave him at the scene. The cars were blocking the intersection because you could tell they surrounded him at Rosecrans and Santa Fe. And a lot of shell casings. I tell you, that was at the scene because we had to block it all off and stuff. But it was bold. But they wanted him. It was an execution, really.
There was a bridge. They built this stupid bridge that shut down a lot of businesses in Compton over Rosecrans that went over the railroad tracks at Alameda, I believe. From what I remember, they caught him on the bridge and they started following him on the bridge, and then he can't get off of it. So when he got to the traffic light at Santa Fe, they got him where they want him at. And they got out of the car and walked up on him. And I don't think they wanted to miss him. To me, it sounds almost like an intentional hit. Because if you're gonna do a drive-by, you're just gonna light the car up. Why take a chance of getting yourself shot too? So for some reason, they walked up on that car that day. 13 bullet wounds, there's no way they could did that with a drive-by.
So, who did it? One of the two shooters was described by the firefighters as a young man, possibly African American, with a very light complexion and short hair, possibly braided. They were approximately 6 feet tall, 160 pounds, and dressed in blue denim shorts and a white t-shirt. That was the shooter that shot through Heron's passenger side window. And the other gunman was described as a black male, 19 to 23 years old, wearing a white shirt and black pants, with short hair, possibly shaved, and a medium complexion. Police asked Heron's brother if he knew of any issues Heron was having with two guys named Felix Wilcox, aka Juju, and George Williams. The brother responded that Heron had warned him to, quote, watch his back against George and a subject named Poochie Faust. He claims that back then, George and Poochie had taken car parts from Heron's lowrider, and that Heron's brother had knocked Poochie out, and Poochie had pulled a gun on him. Poochie, of course, would go on to become a suspect in the murder of Biggie Smalls. And one of Heron's associates who had witnessed the shooting and chased the gunman told police that he had heard that 2 OGs from Looters Park, Piru were responsible for Palmer's death, and that he knew them as G and Juju, and that it had started long ago when G was fired from Death Row Records. And this all takes us back to the rivalry that had broken out amongst Piru sets associated with Death Row Records. The fearsome George Williams had reportedly been fired by Suge Knight after Williams had refused to return vehicles that supposedly belonged to the company. In the ensuing feud, Poochie and Williams had allegedly taken car parts from Heron's lowrider, setting off what many believe was a string of connected murders over the next several years, with Heron being the first to fall. So it seems to me that since police asked Heron's brother about this feud, they were considering it as a possible motive for the shooting. And they may have asked Heron's brother if he'd seen Williams at the park that day, apparently considering the possibility that it wasn't just a chance encounter and that Heron may have been followed by his killers, because Heron's brother told them he hadn't seen Williams at the park. And it's intriguing that the coroner noted on several bullets recovered from Heron's body that the letter G was scratched into their bases.
He was feared, and he was another one of those guys that you didn't see too often. He was never around. He was always in the shadows. The investigation work we did, I remember a lot of the people was going backwards. And I'm sure it was because they were afraid of him. As Reggie used to say, all roads lead back to Compton, so I don't know.
Because Heron wasn't no joke. Now Heron, it was a rivalry between two cats, a feud, or involvement of two different people that weren't no jokes. But they were partners, they were friends. I think that's right when this individual I was talking about that used to work with Death Row, that was long hitter, shooter, you know. They can say it, I ain't gonna say it.
He's still alive, so I'm not gonna say it.
Yeah. He's still alive. It's an interesting point you're making that, because it was out that he wasn't alive.
They had shot at Heron before that, man. When I first got out, when Pac got out and I got out right after that, somebody tried to gun Heron down then. Central El Segundo or Avalon El Segundo. He had a red Cherokee. Light skinned nigga on swole with the big long braids. You couldn't tell him nothing. Every time he talking, turning, you know how them niggas when they got the long. That's Heron, let's go. That's the homie, man. They tried to get him in. He barely escaped.
The day of the murder, detectives immediately got a major break in the case. The firefighters who'd witnessed the shooting got the license plate number of the suspect's minivan as it sped away, and detectives quickly tracked it down and impounded it. And witnesses, including one of Heron's Piru associates who'd chased after the shooters, then identified the driver from a photo 6-pack. The Piru friend of Heron's who ID'd the driver refused to sign the 6-pack, telling police, "I can't sign anything, they know where I live. And this is deep, you don't know who is who in the hood." And he said he didn't go home for 2 days after the murder out of fear. Police learned the van was registered to one of the driver's relatives and that he had borrowed it that day. And that relative called the driver asking, "Why are the police looking for my car?" And inside the van, police found a box of .380 caliber rounds under the seat. When police interviewed the driver, he claimed he was afraid that if he told the truth, he or his family would be harmed by the subjects who shot Heron. He admitted that he was driving the van at the time, but that he'd only known the two shooters for a couple of months. And on the day of the shooting, he claimed he'd picked the two of them up for a beer run. But the driver claimed the two shooters were brothers and that he knew the older brother only as Nachi. He said that when they pulled up behind Heron at the light, Nachi and his little brother just jumped out and shot Heron, with Nachi supposedly being the shooter who fired through the passenger side window and the little brother firing through the 4Runner's rear window. The driver claimed this was a total surprise to him and he was shocked. He said he didn't even know the brothers were armed until they went after Heron. The shooters then jumped back into the van and said go, 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 so he drove them east and then let them off near Looters Park, which is Mob and Looters Park Piru territory less than a mile away. So if true, that would imply that they were associated with one of those sets. But the driver claimed the two shooters were actually neighborhood Pirus, and that Nachi had Piru and NHP, the abbreviation for neighborhood Piru, tattooed on his neck. But it's odd to me that shooters from a different Piru set would then be dropped off in the neighborhood of the victim that they had just killed. Complicating things more, there is also a theory that one of the gunmen was female.
And they had it as all guys, but we subsequently found out that one of the main shooters was a girl that wore her appearance was like a male with a hat and all that.
Regardless, police apparently didn't buy the driver's claim that he had no idea the shooting was going to happen. He was charged with murder, and his bail was set at $1 million. But to this day, the two shooters have never been identified or charged. Heron's murder sent shockwaves through Death Row Records. As Compton gang detective Bobby Ladd put it, until that moment, nobody ever had the nerve to take out anyone in Suge's inner circle. At least, no one in Compton. And this is also why solving drive-by shootings, especially, is so difficult. And it's something to keep in mind when considering the similar murders of Tupac and Biggie. Because even if you find the vehicle that was used, and even if you find the person who was driving that vehicle, you still have to prove who else was with them and who did the actual shooting. One thing that struck me while producing this episode is that the intersection where Heron lost his life is virtually unchanged since then, with all 4 businesses that were there in 1997 still operating today. Witnesses in this laundromat and the Mexican restaurant and the Jack in the Box were all interviewed by police. 3 decades later, it's like an intersection eerily frozen in time.